Side 2 begins with yet another movie, as the deep, ominous booming of what sound like synthesized drums come in before actual synthesizers fade in and build up into the track proper. It features a few samples of dialogue from old films such as Casablanca and One-Eyed Jacks. Now, it wouldn't be the first time Pink Floyd had utilized audio and sound bites from such into some of their music. A few bits of movies and TV like Gunsmoke, Gomer Pyle, USMC, and Battle of Britain, among a few others, have been utilized in a few tracks from The Wall. With all that in mind, I imagine in this, Pink is either flipping through TV channels, just like what he did in The Wall, and the old teacher did in the final cut, or maybe even just going to the pictures in the cinema. Either way, he watches film after film, movie after movie, and over time he starts to notice certain reoccurring tropes and cliches. As David Gilmour himself puts it, a single sound, a single kiss, the man who ran, the voice that lied, the girl who heard, the child who cried. Though I guess on that last part, Pink was just really annoyed by the kids crying in the cinema, and it's just ruining his experience. Other imagery David mentions include a face outside a window pane, a sun that burns a fiery red, and the vision of an empty bed. That last bit of which in particular was actually a major source of inspiration and influence for the cover itself, having a ton of empty beds. Then in between these verses, we get a brief, decent, and tragic sounding guitar solo. The first of three in this one, in fact, to be exact. The use of force, he was so tough. Seems Pink also happened to be watching a Star Wars film as well. And judging by the tone of this song, he must have been watching Last Jedi and Rise of Skywalker. Possibly both at the same time. I wouldn't exactly blame him for feeling such a state if that be the case. He has laughed, cried, fought, and died. The comedy, the drama, the action, and the tragedy. And Pink starts to see it all as just the same as all the rest. It's not the worst, but it's not the best. Which could pretty much sum up my personal thoughts on a lot of Marvel movies and shows nowadays. Then we get another ominous synth solo, as well as another wrenching guitar solo, all together lasting for another minute before David sings some more about the ceaseless murmuring and babbling that he had to brook. Again, probably had to deal with a lot of people in the chairs in the cinema. And like with Learning to Fly, there's another brief callback to a song from The Wall. In this case, What Shall We Do Now? Mentioning Sea of Faces. Again, this may likely be coincidence, but considering how The Wall already had Pink watching 13 channels of, on the TV to choose from, I wouldn't rule it too much out of possibility. Anyway, said Sea of Faces has eyes upraised at the silver screen with a vacant look. Must have been the result of them watching a Salzburg movie. I'd cringe at that too. That or an Adam Sandler movie. Take your pick, really. Then he lastly sings of a man in black with red-rimmed eyes on a snow-white horse fading into the setting sun. A pointless life has run its course. Then we get the third and last guitar solo. Each of these try to top the one before it, as the aforementioned Casablanca soundbites could be heard in the background. If David had been born about 40 or 50 years sooner than he actually was, he probably would have made a decent internet reviewer. Gilmour's Movie Reviews, or yet another movie review. Imagine that. It then transitions into Round and Round. Similar to how the Breathe reprise transitions from Time in The Dark Side of the Moon, it's a short and repetitive instrumental interlude. Aside from giving the yet another movie song a bit of a closure, it also offers something of a breather in between bigger tracks, as well as showing off more of not only David's guitar, but also Tony Levin's bass and John Corrin's keyboards. Corrin himself had performed live with not only David Gilmour and Roger Waters in several gigs and concerts, but also with the likes of The Who and Kate Bush. The title itself may refer to the cycling melody or the bass line itself, or, putting into context with yet another movie, serving through TV channel after TV channel, even when you find yourself back at the beginning again and continuing it on over. Kind of like me when I try to find something interesting on Sky, Virgin, or Freeview. Then we get into a 3-part suite, starting with A New Machine Part 1. Clogging up to about 1 minute and 46 seconds, I'd call it an a cappella piece, but that wouldn't exactly be too accurate, as it would imply there weren't any other instruments at all. It basically consists almost entirely of David's vocals being enhanced through a vocoder, along with a faint accompanying synth note by Patrick Leonard. Here, David seems to express a sense of frustration and tiresomeness, claiming to have always been here, looking out from behind these eyes. Wild staring eyes, perhaps? With a strong urge to fly? Feeling like more than a lifetime. Lifetime. Television for idiots. David goes on to say that he gets tired of the waiting, seemingly waiting for the time of death to come, or possibly waiting for Half-Life 3, take your pick really. Then he proceeds to ask us if we ever get tired of waiting, of being in there. Personally, I get tired of waiting for that Rise of the Beast film that keeps getting delayed, and I just want there to be an actually good Transformers film after Bumblebee for at least once. He then ends up this part by assuring us that nobody lives forever. To quote Brian Blessed and Queen, who wants to live forever? This could likely be about Queen realizing his age and already coming to grips with his immortality, possibly long after already have done so in The Great King of the Sky from Dark Side of the Moon, and feeling that even with his war long gone, he has no point or purpose left in this world. But instead of just offing himself and being done with it, like he attempted in the final cut, he just decides to just wait it out. Just a theory on my part. And then we get to the meat of this 3-parter. The middle part, Terminal Frost. An extended instrumental piece of honestly beautiful and underappreciated music, where a lot of talent does seem to be showcased here. Not just David's guitars and Rich's keyboards, but the drum machine, the bass, the backing vocals. It all comes together quite fantastically, almost magically and otherworldly in a sense. The title itself could refer to a permanent coldness or the ending of a coldness, with terminal often meaning incurable or irreversible, or at the ending stage. So I guess it's about Pink, or David for that matter, trying to scrape off and use hot water on the frost buildup on his car. And apparently, according to David himself, this was one of the older tracks in this album, having been a demo for a couple of years up to that point, before eventually being worked on and developed for this album. Boy, imagine how things would have been different if this song had Roger Waters in it had it been made a couple of years earlier. And speaking of, partway into the track itself, we get an emotional saxophone solo from Tom Scott as well as Supertramp member John Hallowell, who, funny enough, this wouldn't be the first or only time David and John had collaborated together in either band. In 1985, David played on the guitar solos for the title track in the Supertramp album Brother Where You Bound. This solo here is pretty much the peak of the Terminal Frost song, really. Later in the track, there also seemed to be some brief yet noticeable dialogue beneath the music, saying something like, "One thing which brings me here ever again," or "never again." There may be more to it, but I can never really figure it out. And I have a feeling a lot of other people are just as curious too. Not to mention there's a slim chance that his voice might also be Nick, as with Signs of Life and Learning to Fly, but that's yet to be confirmed so or otherwise. All that said, this track alone is a hidden gem, and it really makes me wish that David Gilmour would dabble at least a bit into doing a film score or two with this kind of rock style. Then we bookend this suite with A New Machine Part 2. At barely 38 seconds, this is the second shortest Pink Floyd song in their whole discography and existence as a whole, second only to the stop track From the Wall, which itself is around 30 seconds dead. Here, David declares in a rather high finesse that he'll always be here, always looking out from behind his eyes. Then, as he comes back down, he repeats 3 times that it's only a lifetime. As before in part 1, Pink could finally be coming to terms with his own immortality, just like how since he lost his own father and possibly his mother as well. That aside, this could also be interpreted as the answer to the questions asked in the first part. The term itself, a new machine, likely referring to humanity as both individually and a collective whole, how we can easily become drained and emptied of our emotions that we just become machines. Welcome to the machine, if you will. And so our album ends and concludes with Sorrow. And boy howdy, does this album go out on quite the note. While not as big a send-off as, say, Eclipse from Darkside or High Hopes from Division Bell, this 8+ minute rock ballad is still close up there. Like with On the Turning Away, this too starts with a low rising synth note, but this time we don't get David's vocals yet, but rather his guitar, sounding just as epic and grandiose as ever. Then about a minute and 45 seconds in, many more instruments soon come into play, drum machine, bass guitar and everything. And soon enough, in the first verse, David sings of the sweet smell of a great sorrow that lies over the land. And it smells like mustard and grape jelly for some reason. Plumes of smoke rise and merge into the leaden sky. No doubt coming from the chimneys of the Battersea Power Station, being this is Pink Floyd and all. A man dreams of green fields and rivers, only to awake to a morning with no reason for waking. Probably doesn't like Mondays. In the second verse, he's apparently haunted by the memory of a lost paradise from a dream in his youth, yet he can't seem to be precise about it. He's chained forever to a world that's departed. Now I'm just imagining a bloke being literally chained to a miniature earth ball, like a big metal iron ball and chain like you'd see in some of those old cartoons and everything. Then in the third verse, David further describes this individual, possibly Pink, and what he's feeling. Knees trembling, weakened hands, faltered step, and frozen blood, curdled with fright, and he would no doubt die if his blood were to somehow literally freeze up like that. Something else to know about the lyrics here is that David had written all the lyrics here long before actually working on any music itself, when he usually does the opposite approach. And as someone who has written a slew of lyrics, or rather poems, before doing any music, I can definitely say there can be a few advantages and disadvantages to either approach. And at the midway point, we of course get a little instrumental bridging section that seeps with suspense and atmosphere, with siren-like guitars and distorted voices, lasting for about 40 seconds before jumping right into the next verse, where he talks to a river of lost love and dedication with silent replies. So, another day at an old forum then. Flowing dark and troubled to an oily sea, a grim intimation of what's to be. Obviously alluding to pollution, of course. Gotta throw in an environmental message in here somewhere, I guess. An uneasing wind that blows through the night, as dust falls into his eyes and blinds his sight. Should have gone to Specsavers then. And silence speaks so much louder than words, of promises broken. Funny enough, same way this album got its title from a line of one of its songs, One Slip, and Division Bell got its title from a line from one of its own songs, High Hopes. Pink Floyd's last ever album, The Endless River, got its title from one of the last lines of High Hopes, The Endless River. So with all that said, did the song from that album, Louder Than Words, get its name from this line here? Who knows? Anyways, as you may almost always expect, we end this out with one last big guitar solo from old Davy Gilmour, lasting for nearly 3 minutes for the remainder of the track before fading down to a complete close. Definitely up there with Comfortably Numb. This definitely leaves us on a rather ambiguous note for this chapter in the life of Floyd Pinkerton. And with all that said and done, this album is honestly not all that bad. Probably not as big and bombastic as, say, Dark Side or The Wall, but I think it still stands on its own merits. I know many people would see this as a David Gilmour solo album disguised as a Pink Floyd album, in much the same way the Final Cut could be seen as a Roger Waters solo album disguised as a Pink Floyd album, but I digress. I like the atmosphere in a lot of the songs, I love a lot of the instrumental solos, and while David does start to show his age from here on, I think he still tries his best with most of the vocal delivery here, for the most part. Highlights for me from this album include Learning to Fly, On the Turning Away, Terminal Frost, and Sorrow. I do understand how to some, Nick and Richard seem a little sidelined on some productions of certain tracks here. But with the next album, The Division Bell in 1994, they do get to contribute a bit more so. So there's that. Something else I've noted from this album is that how the tracks on each side are arranged. The first side consists of usually about 5 mostly conventional rock songs: Signs of Life, Learning to Fly, The Dogs of War, One Slip, and On the Turning Away. While the second side consists of generally 3 suites: Get Another Movie, and Round, Terminal Frost, A New Machine Parts 1 and 2, and of course Sorrow. Almost similar to how, say, Atom Heart Mother and Medal would have one big suite on one side and a bunch of smaller songs in the other. Or how Wish You Were Here and Animals would have 2 slightly longer tracks on the first half and kind of 3 slightly shorter tracks in the second. Just how I kind of saw it. Then in 2019, as part of the later years release, they went to remix this album and each of the songs in it as a whole, restoring more of Richard Wright's keyboards and more of Nick Mason's percussion, as well as doing some more re-recordings a bit, balancing out the contributions of the 3 members. It also sounds sharper and more polished than the original release. It's not too easy to explain. If you were to listen to the 2 versions of each song back to back at a time, you may notice some differences. Whether that actually makes it better or not is up for your opinion and preference. But for me, I enjoy either version regardless. But hey, more Floyd means more prog rock fun. So if you haven't listened to this or heard of it before, I recommend you check it out. Give it a chance and see how you think of it. Next time, we get a bit closer to the edge with yet another Yes album. Oh, and by the way, next time, storyline resumes.